Hey everyone, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off of the 200 best movies of all time. 200 best horror movies of all time from RottenTomatoes.com. Very different podcast. More Chris Nolan movies on that list, I would bet. My name is Clay, and with me as always is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's getting cold. This is Christmas week. So we decided to shuffle around our schedule a little bit, and we're going to do our wild card next time. And this week we are going to be covering 1974's Black Christmas, which is number 199 on this list at a 71% Rotten Tomatoes score.
Huh.
Had you seen this before? You had not, right?
I had not.
What was your first impression? Without getting too deep into it.
Just like overall, I'm super into it.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I will just say I was a little bit mad. So I've watched it now twice in preparation for this recording. And the first time I watched it through and I finished it, I was kind of angry when I was done. Because I felt like everybody had been hiding something from me. I was like, you fucking kidding me? This movie has existed longer than I have.
Isn't that the best feeling, though, when you find one of those?
Oh, it is.
Because
no, it definitely is.
That's kind of like, when I started watching movies like this was essentially the dragon I was chasing. I was always looking for another one that had fallen into the cracks. That was not that much of a mainstream recognized movie that you just come across and you go, whoa, that was really cool. Which is kind of what my favorite part about doing this show is introducing some of these movies to people who have never seen them before, for better or worse. And which is also why I like doing the wild card stuff too, because we can kind of pull from stuff that maybe that isn't on the list that maybe you haven't seen, and stuff maybe that I haven't seen, and it's I think that's the fun part. Yeah, this one was I had seen this a few times. I remember the first time I watched it, I don't think I liked it that much. I think it just sort of washed over me, kind of. I think in a similar way that Halloween did the first time I watched Halloween. I didn't really like Halloween that much the first time I saw it either.
Oh, but, interesting.
And we'll talk about the connection between these two movies a little bit later. But I've watched it a few times since, and this has really started to grow on me as into one of my, I don't want to say it's one of my favorites, but it's definitely a lot higher up on the list. And watching it this time, I just really enjoyed it top to bottom. You know, I think because knowing what it was going into it this time and having a little bit more, I don't know, I could just kind of relax and get into the spirit of it, so to speak. It's just, it's really fun, and it's dark and weird, and it's a good one.
Absolutely.
So, we're going to take a quick break and play the trailer for you, and then we will come back and talk about Black Christmas.
high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls.
Yeah, what I've done is I've tapped this phone so that when it rings, it'll ring at the station house, too.
There was a little girl murdered over in the park tonight.
Yes, I heard.
Your phone's ringing.
Hello?
Hey, Mommy. There's a baby. Baby, all right, Mom. Just a
Who's there?
I know you're there, nasty baby. You answer me, spirit. Mommy. Come here.
Where's Agnes?
You won't.
What are you doing?
This is Graham. It's group 140, terminal 55.
Remember those idyllic scenes out of your childhood? Crisp winter nights, star bright, sleigh bells, crackling Yule logs, candlelight glistening off of shimmering Christmas trees, chestnuts roasting over open fires, carolers beneath snow-covered window ledges. Remember those. Remember them well. After Black Christmas, they'll never be the same again. Black Christmas, starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, and starring John Saxon as Lieutenant Fuller. If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight.
All right. Black Christmas from 1974. Like I said, number 199 on our list. 71% Rotten Tomatoes score. Directed by Bob Clark. Written by Roy Moore and starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, John Saxon, and a nog glass full of casual misogyny. Amanda, nice. What happens in Black Christmas?
As winter break begins, a group of sorority sisters, including Jess, and the often inebriated Barb, begin to receive anonymous, lascivious phone calls. Initially, Barb eggs the caller on, but stops when he responds threateningly. Soon, Barb's friend Claire goes missing from the sorority house, and a local adolescent girl is murdered, leading the girls to suspect a serial killer is on the loose. But no one realizes just how near the culprit is.
That was a long one. I feel like this one could have been like one sentence.
I was going to say, it's really interesting to me when I find these, the ones that are very brief, where it's just like, Patrick Bateman has a difficult night, or whatever. Yeah. And then the ones that are like, let's go point by point through this plot.
Yeah.
So, Clay, some things you'll find in this movie include sexy phone line exchange designations.
Ooh, yes.
Jeffrey Dahmer's phone sex hotline.
Delicious.
Questionable policing.
Yeah, making a triumphant return for this one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since we saw that one.
And it's not really like... It's not as questionable as in Fright Night, where the guy just dismisses him outright. This feels like fairly honest for the most part. Like, the cops they've got another thing they're dealing with, and they just kind of like, well, we don't really have time for this weird sex caller guy. But it is questionable.
There's a little bit of a gamut, depending on which cop you're talking about.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. We also have an objectively amazing fur coat.
Yes.
Questionable townie-based sexual politics.
Shocking even 40 years later.
Yeah, and an early line in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, everyone's favorite, questionable parenting.
Yes. I mean, I guess a sorority house mom who is a drunkard would count as a questionable parent, right? She is a mother in some sense.
Oh, I would even say that Claire's dad is questionable parenting.
That's true. I mean, I don't know. He's kind of being responsible, trying to hoping his daughter's focusing on school, staying for dinner.
How about this then? Barb's parents.
Yes, Barb's parents and Billy's parents. We don't learn much about Billy in this movie, but I think we can infer that there was some questionable parenting involved there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a safe guess.
Yes. So, Black Christmas, directed by a guy named Bob Clark, who kind of bookended 10 years with an really interesting run of movies, because he had, in 1974, he directed Black Christmas. He also directed Porky's and Porky's 2, and then he directed A Christmas Story in 1983. And I'm kind of, I can't stand that movie, so it really bothers me that A Christmas Story is the movie everybody goes to at Christmas and not this. I would much prefer it if people turned to Black Christmas and they played that 24 hours a day for 4 days on TNT.
Okay, is A Christmas Story the one with the kid with the BB gun?
Sure is, yes.
Okay, yeah, I fucking hate that movie.
Yeah. He also directed Baby Geniuses
What?
2.
What?
A TV movie called The Karate Dog. And Rhinestone, starring Sylvester Stallone and Dolly Parton, which was his follow-up to A Christmas Story. So he had a very...
What?
Yeah, very interesting career. But he started out with low-budget horror. He did a movie called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. And another really cool movie that I would hope that we get to cover at some point called Death Dream, which is kind of like a monkey's paw story about a mother who wishes that her son will come home from Vietnam, but her son has been killed. And so you can, extrapolate that out however you want. You'll probably be right.
Wow.
Yeah.
This guy has like a more varied filmography than Billy has voices.
Yes, that's true. And he managed to... Death Dream is not breaking the mold or anything, but with Black Christmas, he managed to kind of set the rules, or not set the rules, but set the stage for what would become the slasher movie, the traditional slasher movie, maybe 6 years after this, when you start with your Friday the 13th and whatnot. Between this movie and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you kind of mix those two up a little bit. I feel like you have more or less the genesis of the slasher, the modern slasher.
Oh yeah. No, I don't know if we want to jump straight into this, but as somebody who is such a huge fan of Halloween,
Mm-hmm.
I just like watching this. Part of the reason why I think this hit me so immediately as a movie I knew I would like is because you can just see the influence that this movie had on Halloween.
Oh, totally. Yes.
Like right off the bat, like with that first point of view shot approaching the house and climbing the like trellis work into the attic window.
And I guess I'll jump to the connection between the two, because there actually is one, and this is coming from Bob Clark. So I have never, as far as I know, I have not heard John Carpenter or Deborah Hill mention this specifically. But according to Bob Clark, he was helping out John Carpenter in one of his early movies, and they got to talking about Black Christmas. And Carpenter asked him if he had any plans to do a sequel. And he said no, but if I did, it would take place a handful of years after the first one, and the killer would escape from a mental institute, and it would be called Halloween.
Oh, wow.
So take from that what you will. I'm not sure if that's an apocryphal story. I mean, that is a direct quote from Bob Clark. He did say that, but I have not ever heard John Carpenter really comment on that, I don't think. Maybe it's out there somewhere.
Huh, that's a very interesting sort of background mythos to this.
Yeah. And I do think that they do have a lot in common. I think the thing that really stands out to me with this movie, though, not to jump right into the politics angle of it, is this is a slasher movie where all of the girls who are in it have agency for the most part, and they are fairly well-rounded characters. At least the ones who get the most screen time are, anyway. Jess has a lot of stuff going on. She's not just the virginal wallflower who ends up getting put up against the crazy killer. I mean, there's a whole. She's pregnant. You know, there's a whole abortion subplot in this that is not something you would ever really see. I mean, unless you count. I guess I've been watching. I've been skimming the new Friday the 13th box set, and I was watching a little bit of Friday the 13th Part 3, and I forgot that one of the girls in that is actually pregnant.
Oh, really?
It's not really a plot point other than she says it a couple times, but in this one, it's a whole subplot.
Yeah, and it's handled surprisingly, surprisingly realistically and without a lot of judgment.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we're not supposed to hate Jess because she wants to get an abortion.
Right.
Like if anything, you know, we can see her boyfriend kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, well, I get why you don't want to marry that guy and have a kid with him. He's like smashing a fucking piano.
Yeah, he's a really interesting character because he totally acts like a psychopath. However, she does drop that shit on him right before he's going to do his final concert performance. She couldn't have waited like another day. It's a little inconsiderate on her part, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it also almost seems like you were saying, like a lot of the girls in this movie feel like pretty well-rounded characters. I found that whole scene where she goes to, and he's at the piano and she has her back turned and she's in a hat and it's like, I'm pregnant and I'm not keeping it and you can't stop me. That seemed extremely out of character for who she seems to be for the rest of the movie. Like that was kind of maybe the one scene I sort of had a little bit of not a problem with, but that one felt a little bit more to me like it was put in specifically to introduce this kind of tension between her and Peter and give the audience like a kind of red herring thought that maybe he was the killer.
Yeah, and that's something I do want to talk about, whether or not that is successful, because the setup of the movie is there's a sorority house, and the movie opens with you seeing the first person point of view shot of this person who climbs up into the house and then starts calling the girls on the phone and harassing them with very, very convincingly crazy sounding phone calls. You were saying how scary you thought the phone calls were. I think that they still work to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that there's two callers? Because I noticed there's a distinct difference in the tone of the calls, because when the movie starts, they have already been getting phone calls, because the first one they get, they refer to like, oh, it's the moaner again or something like that.
Right.
And that first call they get is very, very sexual in a way that all of the other ones are not. It's very specifically like trying to gross out a bunch of girls.
Yeah.
And the ones that come after that are just the ravings of a lunatic. And so it feels to me like they must be two separate callers, right?
You know, that's a really interesting question, and I think you can definitely argue it either way. I don't know. I'm torn. On the one hand, I agree with you. I think that tonally the first call is way different than the rest of them. And it does feel like somebody who is just trying to, you know, freak out and scare a bunch of like teenage girls. On the other hand, when Barb takes the phone and kind of talks back to him and gives him all sorts of shit, that the tone of the caller's voice switches from this like absolutely insane sounding, just throwing out profanities and gross sexual innuendo, to this man's very normal sounding man's voice very calmly just stating, "I'm going to kill you."
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder, it's sort of like, maybe that's a little bit of a trigger for him where it flips a switch inside of him. I don't know. It is an interesting question, though, especially where they do talk about, like, oh, it's the moaner again.
Yeah.
And we have just watched the mysterious killer climb the outside of the house to get in, like, just that same night.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, and it kind of, it's interesting if it is the same killer and Barb talking to him sets him off like that, because I feel like the theme of this movie is women have to put up with a lot of shit from men. And because at every turn they are one character or another is getting dismissed or talked down to. Jess gets a lot of it, where in ways that are even not super on the nose. Like there's a couple times where, well, there's the obvious one where Peter says, "Oh, you're only thinking of yourself" when it comes to the abortion, and
right.
Even when they're trying to trace the call, she's getting kind of talked down to by the cops, saying, "You have to give us more time." She's like, I'm sorry. Like, if they're putting it on her in a way that seems very, very pointed. And even at the end, we were joking about how ridiculous the ending is, because she is passed out from shock, and Claire's dad just like faints, and they rush him to the hospital, but they leave her in the house. I mean, obviously they don't know that the killer is still there, but they don't even leave like a cop with her to watch over her. They just rush
they
this.
just leave her alone in the dark.
Yeah, they rush this middle-aged man who has the vapors out to to the hospital. But the girl who just murdered her boyfriend in self-defense, seemingly in the basement, and is being threatened all day, and all of her friends have been murdered. They're just like, let her sleep it off. She'll be fine.
Yeah, and to top all that off, they have given her some sort of sedative.
Right, yes.
Because they even say, like, well, in the state she's in, with what we gave her, she's not waking up for at least a couple hours. And it's like, so she couldn't even wake up and defend herself if something happened.
Yeah.
But the sort of the sort of like underlying, generally like low-key misogyny from most of the male characters is really interesting. The way that this movie doesn't make a big deal out of any of it. Like,
so I was going to ask, do you think that is on purpose? Like, do you think it's purposefully made to point that stuff out but not bring attention to it? Or do you think they didn't even realize they didn't realize they were bringing that to the forefront? That was just the movie they made. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it's not written to point out all of this misogyny. It just is kind of a byproduct of how people acted at the time. And we're only seeing it now because we're more attuned to that stuff 40 years later, and the culture has changed.
I wonder if it isn't a combination of both, because I think in the cases of like for instance, when the first sorority sister Claire is murdered, but nobody knows she's been murdered, in their minds she's just gone missing. There's all the like, well, she's probably just shacked up with her boyfriend somewhere, which works out for the cops about 10 minutes until the boyfriend shows up at the police station saying, no, she's not. What the hell?
Right.
But then they imply that maybe, they're in her room and they see the picture of the boyfriend and say, well, who else was she seeing? like the immediate assumption that like, of course she doesn't have just one boyfriend. She's, you know, these young girls these days are just slutting about with everybody.
Which I wouldn't say is a inappropriate question for the cops to ask, but the phrasing of it is the thing. It's not, is she seeing anybody else? It's who else is she seeing?
Exactly. And it's not, they don't do it to just her.
Right.
They even say that, like, to Jess and to the other girls, well, it's probably just one of your boyfriends playing pranks on you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this underlying assumption that, like, all of these sorority girls are probably sleeping with or going around with multiple boys.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's included intentionally to be like a feminist critique. I think that's just kind of the attitude about, like, you know, it's the 70s. These are like modern young women. I think that's just the attitude that like some slightly older men had towards like college age girls at the time.
Even Claire's dad does it. I mean, and it's not really,
Yeah.
I don't think it would feel as pointed in that direction in really any other movie, what he more or less says. But since there's so much of that stuff here, it does feel of a piece, because when he gets there, he's talking about, you know, he sees the naked people poster and the fact that she's got a boyfriend and that maybe there's drinking going on. And he's like, what kind of place is this? I didn't send my daughter to a house of ill repute or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, nah, she's in college. She's doing college stuff. But and I don't think, I think in most other movies that doesn't really come off as that much of that what he says doesn't come off as that much of a pointed statement, but it does fall in line with the way that the women in this movie are treated top to bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you add to that, so I think a lot of that kind of stuff is partially just the culture of the time a little bit, but when you add in the fact that there is an intentional subplot about Jess being pregnant and not wanting to keep it, I think that makes me lean more towards, like, at least some amount of this is intentional. Like,
yes,
even that, and the little girl from town, she's like 13, who goes missing, and they find her body in the park. And in the scene where her mother first goes to the police are saying, like, well, I'm sure she's just off somewhere.
Yes.
You know, girls. And the mom's like, no, she's 13. She never just goes off by herself. She always comes home.
It's interesting how something like that has become a cliche in these movies has so much more like subtextual weight in a movie like this, because being dismissive of the characters like that is something you do all the time. It's like, oh, where's Jenny? I don't know. She and Bobby probably just went off into the woods, and it's, you know, they're hanging from the rafters by their necks or whatever. But in this one, yeah, it feels like it has that weird, a bit more narrative and thematic weight to it, because there's so much of that stuff going on, and it's hard to miss it.
Yeah, and who it's coming from is really important.
Right,
because it's not the other girls saying, oh, I'm sure she's just off with some guy. They're all like, well, Claire wouldn't do that. This is really weird. Like, she knew her dad was coming. Her boyfriend doesn't know where she is. She's, like, generally a good, reasonable person. The people who keep insisting that this has to just be young women being kind of trampy and flighty and irresponsible, it's all kind of coming from these male authority figures.
Yeah. And I do think this is a good movie to look at to see how much of this stuff is not just an evil male character calling someone a slut or a bitch, you know? Like, that seems to be the hacky way to dive into this stuff these days, where if you watch a movie like this, it's like you get all different shades of this stuff, from the guy who's exclusively the killer, who's actively killing them, to the obscene phone calls, to the way the people who are supposed to be protecting them are treating them. It's not as intense. It's not anybody calling, like the police captain never comes out and calls anybody a slut or something, but they're dismissive, and it shows you the whole breadth of this behavior and how it affects things. And I think it's a much more interesting look at that stuff, intentional or otherwise, because I think at this point you can look back and read it that way very easily and have it work in that way very easily.
Yeah. That isn't that. I like that point about how like we're so accustomed to like signaling sort of misogyny or like gesturing at these kinds of themes by like one character just sort of being like really verbally violent towards women in a movie. Whereas in this one, I think other than the killer on the phone, and even he doesn't really swear at them. After the first phone call, he doesn't really swear at them.
Right.
I think then it's only like, is it like Phil's boyfriend or something who's Santa?
Oh, yes.
In that batshit crazy Christmas charity party scene, and he calls Barb a bitch once.
That's true. Yes, he does.
And but it's really jarring when he does it. You know, like he's in a Santa outfit. He's got like little kids climbing into his lap, and he says it really like, bitch. And it's like very like, oh, whoa, okay. This isn't just like, oh, come on, don't be a bitch. Like, it's like really notable in the movie.
Right.
That beyond that, like very pointed cuss at a woman, there's really not any beyond that. But there's a lot of misogyny. Right.
And on top, it's if you haven't seen this, let's not bury the lead by saying this is just a political thesis statement. This movie is hilarious.
This movie is so funny.
I don't think one of the things that stood out to me more this time is how funny this movie is and how much of the comedy works really well.
I am just like, I just want to watch clips of Mrs. Mack, the house mother, like every day.
She's fantastic.
She is amazing. She is so much fun.
She hides booze all over the house. She hides booze in the toilet. She hides booze in books. There's a
for
good,
booze, Clay.
B is for booze. My favorite children's book. There's a good section of the movie that she spends with only a quarter of her lipstick done, I think, because she gets distracted when she's doing it and never fixes it.
Yeah, she's looking for her cat, Claude.
And you can't talk about the comedy without talking about Officer Nash down at the station, the police comedy in this I find so authentic for some reason, because John Saxon is so
everyone's dad.
He's just a dad. He's a cop dad. I like to think that this is the same character that he plays in Nightmare on Elm Street, so he's just seen some shit. But after when the scene where he reads the exchange number that Margot Kidder left, where she convinced Nash to write down fellatio 555 or whatever. The scene where he's looking at it, but his partner or the guy at the other desk is just laughing hysterically because he knows that he's going to see it, just feels so real.
Yeah.
And then when they bring it up to Nash, and Nash doesn't understand what the joke is, and then he gives that sort of like Fredo Corleone kind of thing where he's like, it's dirty, right? I'm smart. I get jokes.
I get it now.
Yeah, it works really well. And the thing that's so great about it is Nash's stupidity and his lack of tact actually pays off in the twist of the movie at the end.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like no, without Nash and his very specific flaws, like most of this movie wouldn't work the way it does. Because even early on, where he's sort of dismissive about Claire going missing and the phone calls and all that, he sort of makes it so that there's not a lot of action happening with these problems that these girls are having early on, which gives it time to sort of ramp up and become like a bigger and bigger issue, I guess, to put it lightly.
Yeah, and he's the first line that they have to get through, and he's the most dismissive of everybody.
Yeah.
Because they go down to him.
Yeah, he's even dismissive. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just that he's even dismissive of the woman whose daughter is missing. Like, he's just sort of like, oh yeah, you know, kids run away. We're working on it.
Right. Like he wants so. I'm probably reading too much into this, but it's like he wants so badly to be a cop that he's like putting on the airs of we don't have time to deal with your petty shit kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think that's true of him. I think that's like a really good character point. Because, you know, where it's just like, yeah, I'm in my uniform. This is, we only deal with important stuff here.
Right. And I'm sure he wants everybody else to take him seriously, even though he's a doofus.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to handle things as extra professionally as possible. And then he ends up writing fellatio, whatever, and doesn't understand it.
Capital F.
Yeah.
Little E.
Yeah. That's a little detail that I actually really appreciate. Because one of the things I used to, when I grew up, I watched the Superman movies all the time because I had them on I taped them off the TV. And I think it's in Superman 2 where Margot Kidder's Lois Lane is spelling something out, and she does the same thing that she does in this movie where she says like F-E, little L, little T or whatever. And they do this. It's such a specific thing that it must be just something that she did in her real life when spelling things.
Yeah, like an authentic verbal tick that she just had.
Yeah, because I mean, like, what? Why would you assume that it was not a little L? I don't know, but
right. The like letters in the middle of a word.
Right, unless it's you're spelling out an Italian last name or something. And one of the other things I think this movie does really well is it sets up the killer on the loose setting. I think is very effective because there's as you mentioned earlier, there's a little girl, like a 13-year-old girl who's gone missing and ends up dead. And they never directly tie that in to the killer inside the house. Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert. And you can infer that he probably killed this girl as well, but they never directly say that. But what that secondary killing does is it presents in this atmosphere of there's a killer on the loose, so these phone calls that these girls are getting isn't really a big deal. Like all of the attention is being brought to, a child just got killed somewhere. We have to focus on that. So everybody ignores the fact that there's a crazy person in the attic of the sorority house killing people.
Yeah, and I think that it does a good job of making it like reinforces what we were saying for the characters, especially for the cops. What we were saying earlier about their attitude towards these sorority girls. Mm-hmm. Having this missing child and then this murdered child reinforces their assumptions that these girls are just being overdramatic and just, they need to handle it themselves. They need to just deal with it. Oh, it's somebody playing a prank. You're overreacting. Mm-hmm. It makes that feel more legitimate because it does feel more important that a child has been murdered versus somebody's getting creepy phone calls. Like, right. Objectively, that's true.
Right.
But I think it does play into certain assumptions that they already have about the girls.
Yeah. And it helps that no one ever sees the other murders happening. Like they don't know, even at the end of the movie, they don't know that Claire's dead. They don't know that Mrs. Mack is dead. They know that Barb and the other Phil, they know that they're dead, yep. But they don't know that that these other two have been killed. So there's no urgency on the part of the police or anybody else to take their focus away from this killer on the loose. But that electricity of there's someone out there killing people is very palpable and does work really well for the setting.
Absolutely. I think it's also interesting because it has a lot of that, like, it sets up characters to, go out and be part of the search party and be out in the woods and get them out of the house and then bring them back in and then bring other characters, like there's some weird guy peeking in the window and it turns out it's just two like weird locals who are just like, hey, what are you doing in here? Do you know there's a little girl murdered? You shouldn't open your door. And they're like holding a shotgun.
And not to jump back to the casual misogyny element, but
no, please.
Even at the end of that scene, they're there to like tell them not to leave, and then when they shut the door, they have the camera on them as the door shut, and they both kind of go like they just like they're scoping out the hot babes or something. It's a really weird reaction shot where they're both like high-fiving that they got to talk to the hot sorority chicks or something. It's very strange.
Absolutely. Like they won't let them close the door.
Right.
They're telling them close and lock all your doors and windows, but they keep leaning back into the door and making them reopen the door so they can try to keep talking to them. It's this very first of all, it's very funny.
Right. Yes, it is.
Like the whole sequence is pretty funny, but it's also very like, I don't know. It just reemphasizes like, the sort of like the neighbors and the town kind of search party / posse and the police and the sorority house mother and Claire's father. Like all of these adult authority figures fail these girls in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Mostly because they kind of write them off as like flighty, ridiculous, idiots who are only interested in booze and sex.
Right. And honestly, not that Barb does anything wrong in this movie, but her attitude kind of reinforces that point of view. It's like, one of them is shit-faced, so obviously the rest of them are probably ne'er-do-wells as well.
Yeah, Barb's really interesting. So the first time I watched this, I missed the phone call that Barb has with her mother, I think it is. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I just was maybe like taking notes or doing something else. But the second time through, I noticed it, and it's this like, Barb isn't fully shit-faced yet. She's maybe had a couple drinks, and she's talking to her mom about like, oh, I'm so excited to spend Christmas with you. And then it's clear from her into the phone call that the mom is like, oh, no, I don't want you to come home.
Yes.
I'm going to go skiing, or I'm going to go on vacation with my new boyfriend or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I found that really interesting because I think that adds like a motivation to Barb that takes her from being just kind of a drunk asshole to a much more sympathetic character who's like, she feels unloved by her parents.
Right.
And then is just kind of like, well, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to get drunk. Who cares?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. She's clearly the wild card in that house, but that doesn't mean she's constantly drinking all the time. It's clearly a response to being dumped by her mom.
I wonder if her feeding champagne to like an 8-year-old boy is too. I keep coming back to that Christmas party because as much as I'm saying like these girls are fine, they're just college girls having fun. None of them do anything wrong. They don't deserve it. I would not trust them with my children.
No.
Like, whose children are these? Who's sending their kids to the sorority house Christmas party with the drunk girl giving them champagne and Santa swearing profusely in front of them?
A cool mom, that's who.
A cool mom. Maybe that should have been on our list instead of questionable parenting. Cool moms.
Implied cool moms across the board. So that does bring me to something that I wanted to talk about because we've talked about how generally we have the same affinity for less exposition and more inference as far as plot and character go. And how do you feel about that in regards to this movie? Because I feel like this is a great example of let your movie tell the story. Don't tell the story of your movie.
Yeah, no, I
you could put
I
that
totally
on a T-shirt.
agree.
I just coined that now. It's going on a T-shirt.
That was good.
That's
was
gonna
really
be
good.
That's gonna be on the back of my book with my awesome author photo. It's gonna say that underneath it.
Your book entitled God, what were you calling it? Like the narrative cone of vision?
Yes.
No, yeah, I completely agree that this movie is a really excellent example of how that kind of technique works and how it can work really well, where, you know, Jess has an English accent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is supposed to, is this supposed to take place in Canada?
I have no idea. It very clearly does.
Right.
If
right.
if the oots and the casual hockey wasn't the dead giveaway.
Well, you know, we'll just say the U.S. or Canada somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be somewhere identifiable to the audience.
Yeah, but like we never get there's never a whole big backstory about how Jess is the foreign exchange student.
Right. Yeah.
We never find out how she and Peter met or how long they've been together. You know, we know Barb's not close to her parents, but we don't know, we don't get this whole sob story about oh, well, my parents divorced when my dad left my mom for his secretary because he's a high-powered lawyer in New York City.
Right.
We don't get any of that crap.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say in my opinion, most importantly, we don't get any information about the killer.
Right.
And I think it all works so well because you don't really need it. These girls are kind of a type.
Mm-hmm.
They're well-rounded characters, but there's a certain shorthand that you can apply to them when you hear, sorority girls living in a shared house at college away from their parents in the 70s.
Yeah.
There's a pretty quick shorthand for that where it's okay, they probably yeah. But you could say, they probably have parties. It's a sorority. Mm-hmm. They usually have a fraternity that's their brother fraternity. They're probably experimenting or running around because they're without parent supervision for the first time in their lives. I don't know. You can make certain leaps straight into what kind of lives they're going to be leading, even if they're different types of characters than you were expecting. So you don't really need all the plotting exposition of Jess and Barb aren't really friends because Barb was dating Peter first, and now there's a rivalry, and that's why Barb's you just don't need any of that. It works without any of that.
The closest they get to that is towards the end where the cops have sort of started to think that Peter might be the one behind this. And Phil is consoling Jess, and she goes, I never liked Peter, but I don't think he's a killer.
Yeah. Yeah, and she just kind of casually, she just drops it in there.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as Billy goes, when you really take a step back and look at slasher killers, most of them have identifiable backstories. Even Michael Myers. Michael Myers, his motivations are unclear, but that he was a kid who killed his sister, and then he was in a mental hospital for 20 years or 15 years or whatever, and then Loomis spends the next 6 movies explaining to you why he's evil and how he's got the black eyes of Satan and shit. Jason Voorhees is the only thing that makes Jason Voorhees a mystery is because he's so inconsistent movie to movie, where sometimes he's a mountain man and sometimes he's an unkillable zombie, but who he is, his mom, his motivation. Freddy Krueger. The you know all about Freddy Krueger. The closest you can probably get to this is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because you don't really know a ton about the family in that movie. But I would argue you know more about the family in that than you do about Billy in this movie. So Billy seems to be the killer with the least amount of exposition. You don't even see him. You never see him once. You see his eyeball in probably one of my top 5 favorite shots from a horror movie ever. That shot where Jess sees his eyeball through the crack of the door. Fucking unbelievable.
Oh,
it's
God,
so good.
It's so good.
And that's it. That's all you get. All you get, the only thing you know is the kills and the phone calls and his general level of like uncontrollable insanity. And I think it works so well that you don't need anything else.
Yeah, I would say if anything, it makes him scarier because there's no strategizing, there's no logic you can try to put on him to make his actions make sense in a way that would make you feel like it was avoidable.
Right.
Even a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things I know that I like about Halloween, and I know it's been said and talked about, is that Halloween brought this sort of horror and terror to these very peaceful, idyllic suburbs. And it made it feel like even when you're living somewhere very safe and you think you should be fine, you're still kind of at risk. These evil things can happen to you no matter where you're at. Which I do agree with. But at the same time, Laurie had the misfortune of being in the wrong house, or in the wrong neighborhood. There was a reason why Michael Myers went back to Haddonfield. It's because that's where he was from. Mm-hmm. But we don't know anything about Billy. We don't know, is he from there? Is he just kind of a transient who is passing through?
Yeah, they don't even specify that he escaped from anywhere, right?
Yeah, he could just be like a riding the rails or some shit and stopped in this town and just decided, all right, here's where I'm going to kill a bunch of people.
I also feel like his style is very unique because I think probably starting with Michael Myers, the prevailing hacky, and I'm not saying Michael Myers is hacky, but the prevailing hacky, scary acting killer, quote unquote, is usually very still and very quiet. And that works to a point. It works great for Michael Myers. But in the year 2020, when they're still doing that shit, it's he's standing there looking at you, scary. Yeah, sure. So it's like a breath of fresh air to see a killer who's loud and fucking nuts, capital N nuts, where he's just smashing shit,
crashing around in the attic,
talking in different voices and stuff. It's a very unique approach to horror movie monster killer.
Yeah, and I think it also adds again to how scary he is because he's so erratic. This is somebody who goes, he has all his different voices and tones and volume levels and what have you, but this is someone who can be quiet and still enough that even when Jess is in the house alone, or she thinks the other 2 girls are upstairs sleeping, but they're dead, and she's alone. That means that's it's a pretty big old house, but it's quiet,
right?
And he's moving around up there, and she doesn't hear him.
I was thinking this time that the least believable part of this movie is that he could be that loud and no one would hear him in the attic. Because I've been in those houses. Those houses have generally thin walls. So if he's making all of those calls from Mrs. Mack's bedroom, someone downstairs is going to hear him acting like a fucking crazy person 1 floor away.
Right. I mean, but I agree. But putting that aside,
Right.
like,
Yes.
I guess I'm just saying he's someone who's capable of being very, very still and very,
Right.
very quiet when he needs to be.
Yeah, when he kills Barb and Phil, he's very quiet.
Yeah, and that's that scene that leads to your favorite shot there with his eye just like framed in the light in the crack in the door. He's standing in there while she comes in and like investigates, and she doesn't realize he's there until he starts whispering at her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think being able to like flip that switch on and off to go from that sort of like complete undetectable stillness straight into that like absolutely maniac behavior of like, grabbing her by the hair and screaming and slamming doors, like being able to make that transition that fast makes him really jarring and really scary.
Yeah, definitely. Do you ever find Peter to be a believable red herring?
No.
Yeah, I don't really either.
I wanted to, like, I actually, like, it was funny because even as I was watching it through the first time, I saw what they were doing, and I wanted to have that, you know what I mean? Like, I wanted to let it work, I wanted to buy into it, but straight away from the way they open the movie.
Yeah, because I was
like,
going to say, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just very, you can very easily put together based on the opening shots of the movie where it's that POV where he first comes into the house and they don't notice, and then the times where the first phone call happens, then Jess has the phone call with Peter and says, I need to talk to you, and then she goes like across campus to visit him, and it's like right away, and then Claire gets killed. It's like right away it couldn't possibly be him.
Right. Well, that's why I was wondering if he's not supposed to be a red herring for the audience. He's just supposed to be a red herring for the characters.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, because it's never like they blur the line a little bit towards the end where they have to convince Jess that it's him by having him be in the house taking a nap conveniently when the phone call happens or whatever. And I think it's more for the benefit of the characters than it is for the audience, because I think leading into the ending, when she does kill Peter, and then they're like, well, I guess that case is closed, and then they just leave, you're left going, no, you fucking idiots, it's not him, he's still in the house.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's very much put in there to build a case so that at the end the cops can all feel like, oh, well, guess there's a level of closure on this one.
Right. Yeah. Do you sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to change the subject a little bit, so go ahead.
Oh. To what?
Just the comment that I absolutely fucking love the fact that they don't find the bodies in the attic.
Yeah.
I think that's the creepiest, like, the best creepiest fucking detail in that, like, ending shot where it just kind of goes out from them dead in the attic. I'm just like, oh man, this movie's great.
And Claire with the dry cleaning bag around her head is a very good image. Like, it's a very iconic shot that they go back to a few times, and it's even on the poster.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
It's a kind of gutsy image to put on your movie poster.
Yeah, the poster's actually pretty good. At least the one on IMDb, where it almost has like a Norman Rockwell painting kind of feel, where it's this holly wreath, and in the middle of it is Claire with a bag over her head and her mouth open in horror. So it's a pretty good poster.
Yeah. The image of her face and the plastic and her sitting in the rocking chair, and like there's that one moment where you just see Billy's hand reach out and like put the doll on her and like rock her in the rocking chair. It's so creepy.
So I mentioned that Nash's lack of tact leads to the payoff of the twist, which is that the calls are coming from inside the house, which is delivered. I just love the way they get to that, because John Saxon is like, Nash, very calmly, just tell her to leave the house. Anybody, and if you screw this up, I'm going to kill you. And so he calls up and he's like, is anybody in the house? No. Okay, I'm going to need you to leave the house. Why? Would you just leave the house? Why? What's going on? God damn it, Jess, calls are coming from inside the house.
Yeah.
Like it's his reaction is like, this stupid girl won't listen to me. So I have to do I have to freak her out. It's really interesting. How do you feel about that twist? Do you think it works?
I do think it works. I think it works because it's, I don't know if I would fully call it, again, it's kind of like, it's not really a twist for the audience, but it's a twist for the characters.
Right.
And I think there's that feeling of like payoff and catharsis where like you as an audience member have known this whole time that the killer's inside the house. Mm-hmm. And that's where all of the suspense in this movie comes from, is like, these girls are just walking around their house where they think they're safe, absolutely not suspecting a thing. And you watching it are just like, don't go upstairs alone. He's in there with you. Don't do it.
Right.
And I think there's something so, cathartic when kind of your protagonist is finally given that same information. Like she finally catches up to where you're at. And you're like, yes, see, he's there. Like, you gotta go.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just I think it works really well in terms of like it by bringing her into that information, it just like, then like all bets are off and the stakes are like raised a bit higher at that point.
Definitely. And I do like that they make sure that the twist works by having John Saxon very casually toss off the fact that there's another phone line in the house, where they're like, well, what's this number? It's like, it's the same house. It's the house Den's mother's. They don't know. No calls coming to that one. We don't have to worry about that. That's not going to come up ever again.
Yeah. Just ignore that conspicuously convenient second phone line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think this is the first, let me just double check when A Stranger Calls came out. Because 1979. Yeah, okay. So When a Stranger Calls came out in 1979, and that is actually the famous one where it turns out the calls are coming from inside the house. Most of the time when that's referenced, it's a reference to When a Stranger Calls, which was 5 years after Black Christmas. And it's kind of a shame, because Black Christmas didn't really do very well, I don't think, when it came out. It came out under a couple different names, I think. And it never really clicked, as far as I know, as much as the movies that came after it did. And didn't it come out under the name like Silent Night, something night? I think so. Yeah, I'm sure one of them was like also He's in the House with You or some shit like that, where they just give everything away.
He's in the house with you, watch out.
Yeah. And going back to a little bit to the tension that's built with him being in the house, I feel like you can see the bastardization and watering down of that when you get into the 80s slasher stuff too, because they just sort of cliff notes all of that suspense Friday the 13th had the benefit of a Jaws-like musical score that had a very recognizable motif they could play any time that they wanted to imply there was a killer near them. And I think you can see it get watered down into someone's alone. There's probably a killer near them somewhere. And it's just not as palpable or satisfying as knowing this movie is more like Hitchcock suspense, where that there's someone in the house, that he's killing people, they don't know there's someone in the house. And so you're just going, you're screaming inside your head, waiting for them to figure it out.
Yeah, and it does this interesting thing where, unlike the sort of more famous slasher killers, Billy is stationary. Like, he's in the house, and that's where he is for the whole movie. He's in the house.
Yeah.
All you have to do to get away from him is to leave the house.
Right.
He's not going to chase you out. He's going to stay in the house. And I think there's something about that just changes the feeling of the whole movie, because it makes you know that escape is right there. It's so simple for any of these girls to survive. All they have to do is walk out the front door. And yet they continuously do not do that. Whereas, when you're watching like Friday the 13th, it doesn't matter where the characters run around at the camp. Like, Jason's just going to pop up. He's going to like teleport in front of them and start trying to like chainsaw their heads off or whatever.
Right. And the thing that I think actually makes it that much more, when I say frustrating, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean like in a tense, suspense tension way, is that in movies, I generally have a problem with redundant movement. Like, if people spend a lot of time like going back and forth to places and it doesn't feel like it makes sense, it bothers me. But in this movie, it works because they keep you're saying all they have to do is leave the house. They do leave the house multiple times. The thing is, they keep coming back to the house. Right. So that's why you can go off and have Jess and Phil go looking for the little girl, and maybe in a different movie they never go back to the house. They end up running into the killer out in the world somewhere. But that doesn't work here because the house is the safety hub. The house is the place that is the central point where, okay, nothing bad can happen here. So you've got people going out into the world, encountering obstacles, and then they come back to the house to where they think that they're safe. The difference is, of course, the shark is already in your boat.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and it's interesting because we fairly recently watched The Society. And
that's actually next time's movie.
Shit.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No, keep going.
Cut that out.
No, you can mention that. We'll just watch it next week.
All right. I was just bringing that up because in The Society, the danger is also in the house.
Right.
But there is that sort of what you were saying about the redundancy of movement, where it's like, he goes out and he goes to school and then he comes home, and then he goes out and he goes to the beach and then he comes home, and then he goes out for a drive and he sees his girlfriend and he comes home. And it's like, it kind of does, it's the same sort of premise of the bad thing you're worried about is secretly in the place you think where you're safe. Except it doesn't do it as effectively with the way he moves around. Right.
And they do that in the Friday the 13th movies too, where you have, it's like, Jason generally doesn't leave Crystal Lake, so if you don't go to Crystal Lake, you're probably fine. But but then in the later movies, you've got people who start at Crystal Lake, leave Crystal Lake, and then they're like, we got to go back to Crystal Lake. And it's like, no, if you just keep driving, once you cross state lines, I don't think Jason's going to come after you generally.
Yeah, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah. But yeah. Oh, I did want to talk about the music a little bit. I think the music in this movie is fantastic. It's not music. I don't think I would want to listen to it. The soundtrack is available on vinyl from Waxwork Records. They did a really nice job. But the soundtrack is just, it's very sparse and it's very dissonant.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something I think I would put on to relax or like just to listen to casually. But as we were watching it the second time, something occurred to me that is really interesting, is that what the soundtrack music is not entirely dissimilar to the kind of music that Peter plays. Peter plays this really sort of modern abstract piano piece, and after he fails at it, he destroys the piano, which creates this very chaotic noise as he's slamming it with the mic stand or whatever. And I started thinking about how the music almost kind of subconsciously works in the favor of Peter as a red herring, because they're hitting this dissonant kind of, I don't know if it's piano. I think I remember hearing it's not actually an instrument playing as much as it is actually like recording someone hitting a piano with a hammer or something like that. It's one of those kind of avant-garde kind of things. And watching it the second time, every time that hit, the first thing I thought was Peter. And it's like, it's sort of representative of his mental state. And it was just a weird subtextual, subconscious thing that I don't know if that was intentional, but it's interesting.
It definitely is. It's sort of like this trying to like make the soundtrack echo the madness of somebody who would do these things.
Yeah.
And then drawing that connection between that music and the music that Peter plays does kind of work on your subconscious in that way. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. So, just rounding it out, this movie has been remade twice since 1974. And I have watched all three of them, so I came in ready to talk about them if I had to. It was remade once in 2006 with a fairly... it was right in the boom of the horror remake era of the 2000s. And it had I don't know if I would call it an all-star cast, but like a very recognizable cast where it was... Katie Cassidy was the main girl, and Michelle Trachtenberg, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Lacey Chabert, Andrea Martin, who plays Phil in the original, plays Mrs. Mack in the remake. And it was directed, it was written and directed by Glenn Morgan of X-Files fame.
Oh.
It's not good. It's it's fun. Like, if you have never seen the original, I could see watching this and thinking, oh, that was a fun early 2000s horror movie. It's super, super gory. Apparently...
I bet.
Yeah, apparently Morgan was getting a lot of notes from the producers, the Weinsteins, asking for more blood, more guts. So it's got, like... At one point, Billy uses a cookie cutter to cut out cookie shapes off of someone's back, and then cooks them in the oven and then eats them as Christmas cookies. There's a ton of like eye pulling out that's really gross.
Oh.
And it's all in service of essentially more or less the same story as the original, except they go into as much detail about Billy as you possibly could.
Oh.
It's the whole movie is basically strung together scenes of different characters telling exposition stories about Billy and his horrible upbringing and how his mother raped him so she could have a daughter, and then that he ended up in a mental institute, and then he killed people. Like it's the exact opposite of this, where it's incredibly gory. The original, not a lot of gore. Like the only real bloody kill is Barb, and I find it very effective in the movie.
I agree.
And in the remake, it is like blood everywhere, and it does not work for me the way this original does. But hey, if you love the remake, that's cool too. It's got a bit of a camp to it, so it's kind of fun. They remade it.
It sounds very like mid 2000s.
It is, yes. It's I didn't look up what came out around that same time, but that was like right as this stuff was in full blast of all these. It's a weird movie to remake because it's not like you can't really trade in on the franchise name because no one really knows anything about it. It's not forgotten. Like horror people know Black Christmas, but it's not Friday the 13th. It's not like a household name or anything.
Yeah, it's also a weird movie to remake because, like, nowadays there are a lot of plot points in it that just wouldn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah. And the remake has, like, Claire's sister shows up and she ends up being, like, a co-hero. And then there's an extended end sequence where they end up at the hospital and Katie Cassidy has to fight the killer at the hospital, and it's just a lot.
Jesus.
Then they remade it again last year in 2019. Blumhouse did it.
Really?
Yeah, they did a very, very quick turnaround where apparently they greenlit the movie in March and it was out in November, I think, or something like that, where the whole production, writing, directing, editing, everything else was like 8 months or something, or 6 months, something insane like that. And
I feel like that doesn't bode well for the quality of the movie.
It does not. It is a remake in name only. Pretty much everything else in the movie has nothing to do with the original story. And it is, how do I put this? Whereas the original deals with a lot of gender and sexual politics in a way that is fairly subtle. This remake deals with it with the subtlety of like a Twitter thread.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Remember how we were talking about how it's more, this movie shows misogyny as more than just calling women sluts and bitches.
Yeah.
Not so much in the remake. There's a lot of that going on.
Okay. So maybe I'll skip that one.
Yeah, it's just like it's really going for the feminist deconstruction of horror movie tropes and stuff like that, but it's not doing it in a very constructive or interesting way. It's just sort of like yelling at you. And
women can kick ass.
Yeah, and I mean I'm all for that sort of exploration, but it just didn't work this time, unfortunately. And it's, again, I don't know why you would take the movie and change, like, why the name isn't getting anything. I don't know. It's a real question mark of a remake.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, that's very strange. I feel like that's just kind of a symptom of how Hollywood loves to just go back to the well of older material and just recycle it into something regardless of what quality you're gonna get.
Yeah. And even outside of that stuff, like the short turnaround time, you're right, does not help because the narrative just is all over the place, and it's just not. Unfortunately, it's a miss. But yeah, just to round it out, this is number 199 on the list. Do you think it deserves to be on the list? Do you think it deserves to be higher? Do you think it deserves to be lower? It can't be much lower than 199.
I definitely think it deserves to be on the list, and I would definitely put it higher.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, just if for no other reason, even if you watch this and you typically like horror movies and slashers, but you watch this and it just doesn't do it for you for some reason, I think even if that was the case, given the impact it had on the genre as a whole, that it's like an important movie to be included on this list, and it's an important movie to sort of the legacy of the things that come after it. I would definitely put it higher.
Yeah, it's really weird, isn't it? Because it almost works as a subversion of a genre that doesn't exist yet. Like if you made this movie exactly how it is in 1974, but you made it now, like if this movie didn't exist in 1974, and then you just, with modern techniques and cast, the exact same script, made the exact same movie, I feel like people would say, wow, that was a really insightful subversion of the slasher movie and the inherent misogyny baked into it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there would be a lot of talk, like similar to what we just spent an hour and change doing. Talking about the abortion subplot and how Jess isn't really she's not judged by the script for it. you know these girls do have sex, but you don't see anyone have sex, and no one gets killed because they had sex.
Right.
People drink, but it's not like their drinking doesn't mean, well, now she has to die.
Right.
Yeah, it subverts all those sort of stereotypical tropes.
You know, I was saying one of the things that I was interested in talking about the Friday the 13th movies when we get to those for our Patreon shows was how oddly conservative those movies get in the level of violence they're allowed to show, but also like how Jason starts turning into this weird like conservative what's the word, like surrogate for going after kids who are drinking and kids who are having sex, and like it's a really interesting kind of thing that these movies turn into, whereas this movie is very much like a politically liberal slasher movie where there's like you said, there's an abortion discussion in the middle of it and nobody bats an eye to the sexuality of the characters and stuff. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially for the time it came out of.
Yeah. But yeah, I would put it much higher as well. 199 I think just speaks to the fact that it's not that well known. Because it's definitely worth seeing. It's a lot of fun. I think it's right on the precipice of feeling really old, though, is probably the biggest thing against it now, because it's.
You don't think it just doesn't just feel really Canadian to you?
That's true too, but you know. But like, you know, you look at something like The Shining. The Shining has a little bit of, it feels old, but it also feels kind of timeless. This one very much feels of the era that it was made. So. Yeah,
I think it kind of has to. Like,
sure.
When such a big piece of your plot is the fact that somebody is calling on a phone, and every time you see a phone, it's like a rotary phone with a giant cord on it. You're just like,
I do remember the first time I saw this thinking like, how does this twist even work? You can't call the same landline in your house. I mean, if they had cell phones, it would work. I don't know, but anyway.
I mean, I was shocked when she gave the exchange as her little like fellatio 555. It's FE. I was like, wait, did they still use those in the 70s? I thought that was like the 1950s. What's happening?
I don't even know, to this day, I don't know what that even means. Like, I don't know what phone exchanges are or anything.
I think it's like if you pick up the phone and there's an operator.
Oh, okay.
And you pick up the phone and you say, operator, give me, and you give the exchange and then the number, and that's how they know where to like send your call.
Oh, is it like an area code almost?
I think so. It's like for I don't know. I could be 100% wrong. I'm sure somebody out there will listen to this and start screaming about how wrong I am.
Yeah, all of our fans at Bell Atlantic will be screaming at us.
Yeah. But I think that's basically how it worked. Is it was like the code you use to give to the operator so that they route you to the right number.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
But it feels just very, very, very old to me. I did not think that was still in use in the 70s.
We didn't even talk about how this movie features the lowest tech phone tapping sequence in movie history.
Oh my God.
Where instead of like someone at a computer very tensely trying to like click numbers into place, it's a literal phone tech guy with like a cup of coffee who looks like he's been up since 5 o'clock walking through the aisles of the phone building. I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, these like giant, like this enormous room full of these giant cases that he has to like run up and down and like fidget with while she makes the phone call.
Honestly, I prefer it to the way they do those things a lot, because I have one of my other beliefs is that I think analog is always a better storyteller than digital. So actually seeing someone trying to chase down the number just gives you more action to your scene than someone like sitting behind a telephone thing in a living room going like, we didn't get it. You know, it's... But anyway.
You mean you don't want this movie to feel like Hackers, where they're just sitting behind a computer all the time?
I mean, I would love a remake of Black Christmas that was a mix of this and Hackers. That would be pretty fun. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for Black Christmas. Thank you guys for joining us. If you like what you hear, you give us a rating or review on iTunes. That would be awesome. And we will get back to our wild card pick next time, which will be 1989's Society. So I hope to see you all at the Grand Shunting. Amanda, thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Clay.
And we will see you guys next time. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye, everybody.